Ever since we started this channel, there's been one pizza that people have been asking us to make, and that's the New York style pizza. So today, we're gonna teach you how to make an authentic New York style pizza in your very own home oven.
How are we gonna know if it's authentic if we've never even tried a real New York pizza?
Well, the only way we could be sure is if we actually go to New York City and try it ourselves.
Wait, what? That was awesome. Now we really know how to make this pizza.
We sure do. And now we're going to teach you how to make it at home. Let's talk about the flour we're going to use for our pizza. Most New York style pizzas are made with a high gluten flour, but what I found is that it's really hard to find high gluten flours in the grocery stores. In fact, if you find high gluten flour at all, a lot of times it comes in these big 50-pound bags that are pretty much unpractical for most people to use in the home setting. So we've designed our recipes to use a lower gluten flour and still get fantastic results. So I tried using bread flour in some of our recipes, and I found that it was a pretty good crust, but it was a little bit too chewy for my taste. So believe it or not, the best one that I found is actually all-purpose flour. This is King Arthur's all-purpose flour, and it's got a protein content of 11.7%, which is actually pretty high for an all-purpose flour. A lot of all-purpose flours are around 9 to 10%. So this is like a heavy-duty all-purpose flour, and I found that it works really well for making this style of pizza. All right, let's go ahead and make this dough. First, we're gonna start off with our flour, about 704 grams. And remember, it's important to weigh these ingredients, and so to make the pizza properly, you need to have a big scale and a small scale. Both of them are inexpensive, and we'll leave links in the description of where you can get them. Now we're gonna go ahead and add our salt and our sugar, and finally our dry yeast. And you can see it's just a tiny amount. We only use about 1/2 gram of the yeast for this dough. Now we're just gonna whisk all this together. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and pour in our water, more water, and finally our oil. All right, now we're just gonna move our bowl right onto our mixer. Now we're gonna start on a low setting. All right, we're gonna let the mixer go for about a minute or so. And what I'm looking for is where it's at right about now, which is where the edges of the bowl look clean and there's no residue in the bowl at all. So at this point, most of our dough is stuck to the paddle, and so we're just gonna take the paddle off and push all of our dough down into the bowl. Just like that. And then I'm gonna use one hand, and I'm just gonna kind of gather the dough up onto itself, kneading it a little bit. Just like that. And now we're just gonna let it sit covered for about 15 minutes to a half hour. Okay, now our dough has been resting here for about 15 minutes, and that's given a chance for the water to really absorb up into the flour. And so now we're gonna switch to our spiral dough hook, and we're gonna mix it for about another 15 minutes. So sometimes when we make this dough, it just kind of spins rather than mixing properly. And if that's the case, what you want to do is just turn the mixer up speed a little bit. And what that does is it increases the friction between the bowl and the dough. And that allows that hook to get a better grip on it. And once it starts mixing properly again, then you can turn it back down to the slow speed and continue. All right, our dough has been mixing for about 20 minutes now. And you can see it's starting to get a little bit more smooth. And that's exactly how we want it. So now we're just gonna take all the dough off the hook, and remove the hook. And now I'm just gonna take one hand and just kind of fold it over a little bit onto itself. Not really kneading it too much. Mostly just kind of giving it one good fold, just like that. And now we're just gonna cover this with plastic wrap, and we're gonna let it sit for anywhere between 2 and 6 hours at room temperature. If you're enjoying this video so far, do us a favor and take a second to click that like button and the subscribe button. That tells YouTube that you enjoy our content, and it'll help spread the channel to other people who like pizza. Thanks. Okay, so here's our dough ball. It's been sitting at room temperature for about 4.5 hours now. So we're gonna get it out of the bowl, and then we're going to divide it into 3 dough balls because this recipe makes enough for 3 pizzas. All right, we've got just about all the dough out of the container. If there's a little bit less, it's no big deal. This dough, I can already tell, is going to handle really nicely. So we're going to get it into kind of a rectangular shape, and then we're going to try to divide it into about 3 roughly equal portions. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to put these into 3 rough dough balls, and then we're going to weigh them all together. And we're getting 1,143 grams. Doing a little quick math, 11,043 divided by 3 is 381. So each one of our dough balls should be about 381 grams. So with our 3 dough balls that are all about the same size, each one of these can make a pizza that's going to be about 14 to 15 inches in size. Now before we make these into dough balls, we want to make sure we have our container ready that we're going to put them in. I like to use these metal containers. They're nice and wide and also a round shape. If you don't have something like this, you can use like a cheap plastic type container, but just make sure it's large enough so that the dough ball can expand fully, and also it helps if it's round because we're trying to make a round pizza, so we want to start off with a round piece of dough. So to each of our containers, we want to add a little bit of olive oil. And now we're just going to take our dough balls and form them into a ball. The way I like to do it, there's lots of different ways. I like to take my fingers like this and tuck it and squish. Tuck it and squish. Tuck it and squish. And you can see what that's doing is it's making the skin on the top tighter. We don't want it to be super tight, but we want it to be somewhat tight. So I'm going to do 2 more. Tuck, squish, tuck, and squish. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll the dough ball in the palm of my hand like this. And that's going to kind of tighten up that skin even a little bit more, and also help to seal up the bottom. So now we've got a pretty good dough ball right here. On the bottom, there'll probably be a little bit of a seam right here. So we just kind of pinch that shut and fold it over, just like that, and that's our dough ball. So we're going to put it down, top side down first, move it around, and then bottom side down. And then one thing I like to do with these round pans is just kind of go like this. And that rounds it up even a little bit more. So that one's ready to go. Same thing with this one. Tuck, squish, roll it in the palm of the hand, check for seams, pinch them if there are any, down. There's number 2, last one. And there we are. So these are gonna go into the refrigerator now for 72 hours. I know that seems like a long time, but I found that one of the most important ingredients in New York style pizza is actually time. It just takes time for this dough to develop and to develop the kind of texture that we want. You can't do it in one day. So we're gonna go 72 hours and we'll check back then. For our tomato sauce, we're gonna use these strained tomatoes from Italy. So as far as sauce goes for our New York style pizza, I like a sauce that's not cooked. If you do cook a tomato sauce, it starts to take on characteristics that make it more suitable for a pasta dish. It loses some of its brightness and some of its tang. The other thing that's important to me when it comes to the New York style pizza sauce is to not add oil to it. I find if you add too much oil to the sauce, it makes the pizza oily and it just gets an excessive amount of grease that we don't want. And the pizza sauce itself shouldn't be too thick. So the sauce should be relatively thin and just run off your spoon or your ladle. And the reason I like that rather than a chunky sauce is because this thin sauce boils really well, and that gives us the kind of cheese melt that we're looking for in the New York style pizza. Okay, I like to keep my New York sauce super simple. So we're just gonna put our strained tomatoes in, and then we're just gonna add about a tablespoon of oregano, about a half teaspoon of freeze-dried basil. This is the kind I like to use. And then some finely chopped garlic. This is 2 cloves. Once all those ingredients are mixed in, we're gonna add our salt. After everything's mixed in, we'll taste it. And if it tastes a little bit bitter, we can always add a couple pinches of sugar. Let's give this a little taste. I'm getting the Italian herbs in there and then a little finish with the red peppers. It doesn't taste like it's bitter at all. I think it's perfect. All right, now it's time to get our cheese ready. I like to use a whole milk mozzarella cheese for this. And it's really important the way that we shred the cheese. You want to get a cheese grater with really coarse blades on it. So that way your pieces of cheese come out nice and thick. We'll have a link in the description where you can purchase this on Amazon. So just looking at this cheese, you can see it almost looks like a thick pasta noodle. And that's exactly the kind of cheese that we want to give us a really good melt on our pizza. And finally, here's our dough at 72 hours. And we are ready to make pizza. So this dough was fermented for about 72 hours in the refrigerator, and then I took it out and let it sit on the counter for about 3 hours. So it's getting closer to room temperature now. So making New York pizza dough is one of the most challenging of all the doughs to make because you have to have some specialized equipment. One thing you have to have is a pizza peel to get your pizza in and out of the oven easily. Some people will use a wooden one for both. I like to use a wooden one to go into the oven, and then I'll use something metal like this to move the pizza in the oven and also to take it out. We don't use a rolling pin, we don't put it in a pan, we have to stretch the dough out with our hands. And that takes some practice. The first few times I did it, my dough kind of looked sideways and it wasn't uniform. And you can expect, if you've never done this before, to have a few pizzas that just don't look very good. With time, you'll get better at it though. So the first thing we need to do is flour our work surface really well. So this is just regular flour, and we want to use a generous amount of it. Now, to get the dough out of the pan, we just want to flip it over and let gravity do its thing. I'm just going to let that sit like that for a little bit, because if we try to reach in there and pull it out, we're already going to mess up the shape of the dough. All right, so there's our dough. Notice it's a nice round shape, and that's how we want to keep it. So we're going to take a little bit of flour and put it on top, and now we're going to start pressing the dough out with the long part of our fingers. We're not going to dig into fingertips at this point. You can see how nicely this dough spreads out. One thing to remember is that there's a bottom of the dough and there's a top of the dough. This is going to be the bottom of our dough because this is what the bottom of the pan, and so we're going to keep that in mind as we make this pizza. One thing we want to do is make sure that any of these little places that have oil on it are covered with some flour so that way it doesn't stick. All right, and we're going to go ahead and flip it over, and we'll do the same thing to this side. We'll start brushing off the excess flour. Now I'm going to go around the edges like this. I'm making a little bit of a rim or a little lip. Once it's spread out to about this level, we're going to pick it up and we're going to shake it back and forth in our hands. That's going to give us more stretch to the dough and also get rid of some of this excess flour. I'm just going back and forth. Now that we've done that, we're going to do the knuckle stretch, where we just go to the edges of the dough and stretch it out like this. When we have it to about the right size, we're going to take the dough and we're going to put it onto our paddle. And on the paddle, I'm using some rice flour so that the pizza won't stick to that. Rice flour is better than all-purpose flour because it doesn't leave much residue and it's really slippery. Beautiful dough right onto the paddle. And then we just make sure that it's round and we're ready to make our pizza. All right, we're going to start off with putting on about 4 ounces of sauce. And we're going to leave about a 1/2-inch margin of dough around the edges. Now we're going to add a little bit of grated Romano cheese. That just gives it an extra dimension of flavor. And finally, we put on about 7 ounces of shredded whole milk mozzarella. Now into the oven it goes. Okay, now I'm going to turn this pizza about 1/4 of a turn because the pizza was just a little bit too big for the steel that was in the oven, and a little bit was hanging off the front, so I just rotate it so that way the whole pizza can get cooked. All right. So we've had this on the bottom of the oven for about 5 minutes now, and the bottom of it's starting to look pretty darn good. So to finish this off, what we're gonna do is we're gonna move this towards the top of the oven, and we're gonna use the broil setting. We're gonna do that for about 1 minute. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Okay, this looks like an authentic New York style pizza. Let's give it a cut and see if we have that nice crunchiness. Take a look at the bottom of this. We want to see a little bit of char. When I hold up the slice, it droops a little bit, and then if I fold it, it'll kind of stay up. That's how I like my pizza right there. So now we know that we can make a pizza that's pretty darn good and very much resembles the kind of pizza that we had in New York City. But what I want to do now is see if I can bump it up a notch and make it even better. One thing I noticed when I was in New York City was how humid it was. When I was walking through Central Park, it felt like I was in a sauna. And where I live, it's a lot drier. And I just kind of started wondering if the humidity might have some effect on the dough. Bread bakers for a long time have used humidity in their ovens to try to increase their oven spring and improve the quality of their dough. And so I decided to go ahead and try that with pizza. To my surprise, it works amazing. It really helps with the oven spring, it helps with the coloration of the dough, and it also helps to keep the cheese from drying out too soon. I'm going to show you the method that I use to increase the humidity within the oven, and we're going to see if we can make this pizza even better. So this is the same dough from the same batch that we started with, and we're going to do this part of the pizza making identical to what we did before. So the key thing that we're doing differently with this pizza is we're gonna add humidity to our oven. And the way that we're gonna do that is we're gonna have some ice in a metal container in the oven, and that's gonna steam and provide lots of humidity. That's gonna change the quality of the bake that we get. This is a deep dish pizza pan. You could use something like that. You could even use a bread tin. You just need something that's metal and that's oven safe. In my case, I like to use a little cast iron skillet that I have just because with the handle, it's easier for me to get it in and out of there. So we're gonna add the ice to it right now, and then we're gonna put our pizza in. Okay, it's looking really good. For this last minute or so, I'm gonna move it up to the top shelf and we're gonna put it on broil. So you see how that cheese is bubbling and the sauce underneath is just melting into it. Take a look at the bottom. Looks really good. I wish you could smell this right now. It smells amazing. Okay, let's grab a slice of this and see how it looks. So all these little micro blisters and those bubbles, that's what we're looking for. This is nice and crispy, and for a home oven, this is about the best char you're gonna get. All right, let's go ahead and get a taste of this. We can see if I do this, it kind of stays straight, just like we want it to, but it would have some droop to it if I let it, and we'll just give it a taste. The first thing I notice is the butteriness of the whole milk mozzarella, and it's offset by kind of the tang of the tomato sauce, and it's all sort of finished off with the sourdough taste of the crust. Overall, it's a really good pizza. Thanks for watching our New York style video today. We hope that you enjoyed it and that you'll try this recipe. If you do, let us know. Until next time, pizza out.